The cartels have engaged in a campaign of violence and terror throughout the Western Hemisphere that has not only destabilized countries with significant importance for our national interests, but also flooded the United States with deadly drugs, violent criminals, and vicious gangs. The cartels functionally control, through a campaign of assassination, terror, rape, and brute force, nearly all illegal traffic across the southern border of the United States. In certain portions of Mexico, they function as quasi-governmental entities controlling nearly all aspects of society. The cartel's activities threaten the safety of the American people, the security of the United States, and the stability of the international order in the Western Hemisphere. Their activities, proximity to, and incursions into the physical territory of the United States pose an unacceptable national security risk to the United States. They operate both within and without the United States. They present an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States. I hereby declare a national emergency to deal with those threats. And that is from President Donald J. Trump on January 20th, 2025, from his executive order entitled Designating Cartels and Other Organizations as Foreign Terrorist Organizations and Specially Designated Global Terrorists. I'm Joshua Treviño, and this is The Hard Country.
Welcome back, everyone, to The Hard Country. My name is Ariana Guajardo. It has been a couple of weeks since we've been back on the show, but so many changes have happened, especially when it comes to executive orders that change how the U.S. and Mexican relationship works, and there is no one better to talk about that than Joshua Treviño. Are you ready to get started today?
Oh, I've been ready for this for 5 years. Let's go, Ariana.
So you just read part of Trump's executive order about classifying cartels as foreign terrorist organizations.
Yes.
Let's start there, because there are so many different executive orders to get to, but I think that this is the biggest one. And I don't think that many people were ready to be talking about this, and we're expecting the change as much as, well, probably we were here at the foundation. But I want to start with asking what changes because of this designation.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the question. Look, the designation of Mexican cartels, Western Hemisphere transnational cartels as foreign terror organizations is long overdue. And it's one of the best ideas in security policy and public policy that has yet to happen. And you have to give the incoming administration of President Donald Trump, number 47, full credit for adopting this idea, because it was not universally endorsed, even here on the right. The Texas Public Policy Foundation was one of the few institutions to positively and fully endorse it. We've had research on the books for quite a while now saying that it's a good idea. Institutions like the Center for Renewing America, also with Russ Vought and Ken Cuccinelli, have also been leading out front on this. So it's been a small band of brothers on this issue, but it has come through. All credit to the president on it. Look, the designation of cartels as foreign terror organizations enables a variety of things that were not possible before in fighting the cartels. And given the nature of the threat that they pose, it's candidly, it's insane that it wasn't done before. Of course, with the Biden regime, you don't expect it to do it because in a certain sense, they had no interest in combating the cartels. But look, what it achieves is several major things, some of which are in I would say, the juridical sphere, some of which are in the political sphere. From a practical standpoint, it gives prosecutorial authority to the United States in a variety of spheres that they didn't have it before. We're able to prosecute individuals for extraterritorial acts. We're also able, I think this is the really crucial part, to bring charges on material support for terror organizations. Great question. So material support means, literally what the phrase says. So, for example, if a member of, say, the Sinaloa cartel comes to me and asks for repairs on the truck, and I operate a mechanic shop, I could fix the truck prior to January 20th, 2025, and everything would be fine. I'm not liable for anything. Now, fixing the truck renders me liable for material support charges. And so you can sort of expand this into an array of spheres. It's finance, it's logistics, it's political support in some ways. And I want to be clear, the intent is not to render like each, mechanic shop owner, liable for support for terror organizations. That's not the way to defeat them. But the avenues of support for these terror organizations, which is what they are, which is what they've always been, but now they're officially designated as such, for these cartels that matter a lot are the political and financial avenues that have constantly sustained them in Mexico and sometimes in the United States for decades. And now we have the ability to go after them in ways that was not possible before. And this brings me to the other realm in which this is significant, which is the political realm. Politics matters. Lincoln said that persuasion is the essence of all democratic civics. He happened to be entirely right about this. It is easy to pull your punches, comparatively easy to pull your punches when you're designating a threat as predominantly a law enforcement threat. The theory of the theory of mind and action that applies to that is police, right? Which are necessary and remain an essential part of this scheme to fight the cartels. But now you're moving into a different realm. You're moving into a political realm. How do you fight terror? You fight them with armed force. You fight them with military means. And that's something that is now on the table in ways that it was not previously. Now, the president always had constitutional authority in his role as commander-in-chief to bring American military force to bear against the cartels. And I want to be 100% clear. I'm not here on the show advocating for an American invasion of Mexico, for any kind of armed intervention in that. But it is manifest and obvious, and I say this based upon years of work in Mexico with Mexican government officials, with Mexican civil society, that we're not going to get the results that we want from them until they believe that that option is on the table for us. This FTO designation, in conjunction with some of the other executive orders that President Trump issued, absolutely achieves that. It's a major step forward. And I'll just say this, and I'll stop monologuing because I know you're just dying to ask another question. But if President Trump had only been in office for 24 hours, and his presidency began on January 20th and ended on January 24th or January 21st. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Math is not a strong suit. I'm a humanities guy. It would have been still with that 24-hour span the most consequential presidency in over a generation because of the breadth and scope and intent of the executive orders that he issued, including on the topic that concerns us here, the border and the cartels.
So it sounds like one of the things that you were saying is that Mexico is likely to continue to work alongside cartels unless they think the U.S. is serious about that we will do something if they continue to do so.
Absolutely.
And that we're willing to defend ourselves from a terrorist organization. So how has Mexico and Mexican officials received or how do they feel about about this order in particular?
I don't think they have a script for it, to be honest with you. And
do you think it was unexpected, like they were caught off guard by this move?
To an extent,
okay.
Yes. We were down, as you know, we were down in Mexico City just about 6 weeks back, talking again with a round of folks in civil society and business and journalism and to an extent in governance. As well. I mean, give the Mexicans writ large credit. I mean, they'll talk to you with some minor exceptions. But what we found was, what I would characterize, and I say this with empathy, honestly, was a sense of denial. I don't think there was a belief. I'm going to overgeneralize here because there are certain discrete exceptions, but I don't think there was a broad belief that President Trump meant what he said, that there was a deal to be made, that he was saying what he said for leverage. And so the fact that he kept a promise on day one to the American people is kind of rocking them back on their heels a little bit. And you can see there's sort of a scramble to figure out how exactly to handle it.
And do you think that's because that's not the nature of like their political atmosphere, or if that is that also because America hasn't had that, commitment to our word in a while?
That's a good question. I would say that's a very good question. I would say it is because they are acting rationally based on past behavior in which for 30 years, or actually more than 30 years, but for the past 30 years in the post-1994 era, which is really the turning point in modern Mexican-U.S. relations, the United States has not aggressively advanced its interests vis-a-vis Mexico. So if you have that experience with them, and again, I say this all charity, but they weren't prepared to step into a new world. They thought that they could get away with all the things that they've gotten away with for 10 years, 20 years plus. Now, with the United States, which is they get to get rich off of trade, they get to enjoy elite access to the United States, to our education system, to our medical care, to parking their capital in the U.S., everything else. But at the same time, turn a blind eye to and profit from cartel and criminal activity that kills hundreds of thousands of Mexicans and also hundreds of thousands of Americans, especially when you look at fentanyl. And they are rocked back on their heels, realizing that time is over. That suddenly, for the first time in over a generation, there's accountability. Suddenly, the United States, which didn't do it, I just want to be blunt, didn't do it under Biden, certainly, didn't do it under Obama, didn't really do it under George W. Bush, is now, didn't do it under Clinton for sure, is now suddenly advocating for itself, defending its sovereignty, calling for, true partnership and equality from Mexico, which hasn't had to deliver that from the U.S. side in really in living memory,
Hmm.
I don't think they know what to do. And it's going to lead them into some bad cul-de-sacs. But we on the U.S. side ought to have no sympathy for them because the reality is that nothing that President Trump has done since January 20th is a surprise to anybody who's listened to him talk. All this is public. This is not a secret agenda that's come out. He's just keeping his promises and doing what he said he was going to do. And now the bill is due.
So then we talked about the reaction in Mexico. How has the reaction been in America, and how is, I guess, how are different interested parties in America moving around this new designation?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. You've seen some initial polling coming out, of course, as we're recording this. What is today's date? The 27th, the 28th, something like that.
You're asking the wrong person. It's a
Okay.
Monday.
It's a Monday. I think it's the 27th today.
Yeah.
So what we have seen with some of the initial polling in the first full week of the Trump administration is that there is supermajority support for this agenda, for the deportations, for securing the border, for making sure that America is in a good spot. And I think that is self-vindicating from a political standpoint. I think it will continue.
Well, then in that case, I wanted to also talk about the other executive orders that have been passed. So what are
Sure.
some other significant ones that influenced Mexico and America?
I mean, there have been dozens of executive orders to date. There's going to be more. There were 2 day one executive orders in addition to the foreign terror designation that I want to highlight. There was one that declared that there was a constitutionally defined invasion taking place at the southern border. Extremely important. That's something, again, that the foundation has been working on publicly for the past 3 years almost.
Right. Is that another area that I guess has split people on the right in the past as well?
It has. It has not been universally adhered to, but you know who did declare it early
Who?
on was Governor Greg Abbott of
Oh.
Texas, who actually got out front, to his credit, and said, "Look, we have a constitutionally defined Article 1, Section 10 invasion." Now, the EO here references Article 4, I think, but it's still the same state that legitimizes what Texas and Governor Abbott have been out front on for years, again, recognizing the reality at the border. And that's huge because, again, that legitimizes a whole range of state action that has been taken, can be taken in the future, and also leads to particular policy ends that the federal government now, from a constitutional standpoint, must take for the defense of the several states. And we think that's a good thing. Let me go on to one more, if I
Okay.
could.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
There's another executive order, and it's quite simple. It's actually very short. But it declares that the United States Armed Forces actually have to defend the United States, which is an insane concept, right? So you see the U.S. Armed Forces, and we defend borders all over the world. We defend the Korean border. We defend, to a certain extent, the Ukrainian border. We defend the borders of NATO. But DOD, and anybody who's involved in the space knows this, has historically, for decades, bent over backwards to not have a mission defending the U.S. border, which is insanity when you think about it. I mean, what else is a military establishment for but to defend our own communities? But that's been the reality, and we've talked to, I won't say, on camera who we've talked to. We've talked with some senior people who have told us in the past that they have tried to engage the Department of Defense and its resources in the direct defense of the United States at the southern border of the United States, including maritime approaches, including land approaches, including aviation and so on. And there is an embedded culture within the Department of Defense. I hope newly confirmed Secretary Hegseth starts to change this. That has simply resisted that wholesale, and there's a variety of motives for resisting it. Some of it's just ideological; they just don't think that they think it's just immigration, right? It's just migration, and so that's not a military affair, which is analytically completely wrong. It is a foreign state threat. Now it's a terror threat defined by the president. But the other reason, in candor, is that if your job, this is to reference for you John Boyd fans out there, will understand this. If your job is to maximize the flow of dollars into the defense industrial complex, not to sound conspiratorial, the border defense doesn't get that done. Defending, Western Pacific does, and so that's been another reason the DoD hasn't wanted to do it. So it took a president of the United States to state something that would have been absolutely obvious to the American founders and, frankly, to every American president until the last, half dozen or so, which is that we have a military establishment fundamentally to defend America, to defend American communities in America at the American border. And that, too, is a tremendous change that is going to, I think, yield great results for us sooner rather than later.
I think there's another common thread between these 3 executive orders we talked about, and I think a lot of that is that either originated or a lot of these ideas were developed here in Texas, like the calls and the asks, like you were mentioning, for declaring invasion as Governor Abbott did, or even desiring that the United States take part in defending our southern border because that should not have lied on Texas. And I think, didn't Governor Abbott recently request from the United States, like basically a refund for us defending ourselves? All that to say, it seems like a lot of these are in line with what Texas has been requesting for years. Have you seen that to be the case in D.C., that they're really asking Texas what they like for our opinion on how to move forward with the border, or how has Texas become a partner in that?
That's a good question. Texas historically over the past 200 years, we're only 10 years away from the Texas, 11 years away from the Texas bicentennial.
I didn't do that math before. That's awesome.
It's true. It's true. It's coming very soon. But over the past 200 years, Texas has always been at the forefront of state-federal cooperation in defense of the border. I mean, you saw it in the 1850s when the bulk of the U.S. Army was posted here. You saw it again in the 1910-1920 period, again when the bulk of the regular Army, plus a lot of the National Guard, was here in Texas in a border defense mission. I think you're going to see it again now in the latter half of the 2020s, in which federal and Texas forces are going to cooperate on this. There's no question that from a policy perspective, especially in the Biden years, Texas has been out front. And again, I want to credit explicitly Governor Abbott for this in making sure that good border policy is in place. And if Washington, D.C. won't do it, Texas has been willing to step into the breach. I'm sorry, you asked me about to what extent people in Washington, D.C. have credited Texas or asked Texas opinions. I don't. I think I will take refuge in Reagan's dictum that you can accomplish anything if you don't care about who gets the credit. I can say Texas has had an effect on the national conversation, but we shouldn't miss that the pivotal figure on all this is actually President Trump. Like President Trump, I think independent of, and I'm not saying Texas had no influence, but he was able to see very clearly what was going on, even prior to his current administration. When did he take that famous golden escalator ride in July 2015, I believe it was.
Right.
So he saw it then. And we should credit him with it. I think the right way to describe this is not as an idea that was incepted in one place or the other and just sort of like bore fruit, but a convergence of President Trump's, very canny understanding of the situation, Governor Abbott's, very practical and hard-minded assessment of what it took to defend Texas, and then the lived experience of people on the border and Texans themselves, combined with, and this is probably the indispensable element in it all, the understanding that all America is now affected by what's happening at the border. It is no accident.
That every county is a border county.
Every county is a border county.
By that, every state's a border state.
Look, who's the most powerful expositor of the like right now, setting aside President Trump, who's obviously at the top of the pyramid. The next most powerful expositor on the border threat right now is our vice president, a guy from Ohio, with Appalachian roots, who I have no idea if J.D. Vance has ever been to South. Maybe he has. I don't know. But it matters not, because his communities and his people have been powerfully affected by our failure to control the border in the area that you and I come from, Ariana. And I think that too is a factor that has moved governance and moved the president into the EOs that he's issued, into the policies that he's now pursuing, and literally thank God for it, really. Not only because America's going to be defended, but also, and I think this is totally unrecognized by the corrupt elites who, frankly, run most of Latin America at this point, is that the people of the hemisphere are going to be better off when the United States starts to defend itself, because the follow-on effects are going to break the networks that control their countries to a startling degree, and that's a good thing.
Well, you're speaking about this entire hemisphere, so let's go into that a little bit. So
Okay.
we talked about how people are feeling here in America, what the attitude was in Mexico. But yesterday, there was a situation that happened in Colombia. Let's
yes.
get into that. What happened?
Gustavo
Go.
Petro. Gustavo Petro. So pardon me. I have to caffeinate for this part.
Oh, no.
Gustavo Petro is a former Marxist terrorist who's now the president of Colombia. Interesting. Can I tell you a short Gustavo Petro story?
Please. This is the perfect place for it.
So he attended the inauguration of the Mexican president back in October, and Claudia Sheinbaum. And now Claudia was known to have kind of academic radical roots. But what was very interesting is that when he was attending her inauguration, he just let loose with press in an incautious moment that she'd been part of the same Marxist terror group that he was. Yeah. So all of which is to say,
Wow.
the networks run deep. Now,
Yeah.
my suspicion, I know Petro was involved in activities to try to kill people. My guess is that Claudia Sheinbaum was just, one of these academic fellow travelers. So she's like in the group, but not anything.
Like the person in America who's like, oh, well, real communism just
real
hasn't been tried
communism
yet.
hasn't been tried except for all the times it has. And so, right.
Well, except for those, Josh, of course.
Except for those. So he's got let's say a robust history on the Latin
Okay.
American left. Colombia historically has been the United States' #1 ally in South America. So it's a very, very important country for us. But unfortunately, with the Petro presidency, a lot of that has fallen apart. He's worked really hard to align himself with these Bolivarians, the Venezuelans, the Nicaraguans, and kind of this Foro de Sao Paulo left that is fundamentally anti-American and also regards illegal mass migration as a strategic tool for them and for the advancement of their aims, which is the weakening of the United States and the elevation of this kind of pan-hemispheric Bolivarian concept. So, this weekend he very foolishly decided to spite the United States. The new president of the United States, President Trump, who was, I believe, at Bedminster. He was at the golf course when all this happened. So if you want to see like diplomacy by tweeting, President Trump was able to do it. And he announced that he was going to refuse landing rights to U.S. deportation flights that were bringing Colombians back to their country. And by the way, these flights were in the air with the prior consent of the Colombian authorities. So he revokes landing permission midair. And his intent is to cause a crisis, to make himself look good. But what he didn't expect was that I think literally within something like 45 minutes, an absurdly short time, the president announces that there's going to be 25% tariffs on Colombians. And crucially, this is what I think really turned things, the Colombians aren't going to be able to get visas to the United States anymore, which if you understand the civics that undergird Colombia and a lot of Latin America, these elites depend, as I said earlier in the show, they depend on access to the United States. If you don't get a visa, you can't send your kids to, University of Illinois, you can't bank in Houston, you can't, get your nice house in Cyprus.
It is funny how all of the elites from like this entire, actually all over the world, but they send their kids to America for college.
To college,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. And so that is a big deal. So striking, and huge kudos to whoever I don't know who it was in the executive branch, whether it was State Department or this wouldn't actually this seems like a Rubio Landau move to me, which is fantastic for understanding that that's really what's going to get action. They could care less about impoverishing their people. I mean, just to be blunt, they have no regard, and they don't really care about the welfare and rights of their migrants, because if they did, they would, labor to improve their countries so that they didn't have to be migrants. And they also wouldn't hand them over to human trafficking networks. So all that concern is phony, essentially.
So that's impressive that America really quickly was able to identify what their interests actually
Quickly
were.
did.
Yep.
and I'll skip the entire day of drama, but by the time the sun sets yesterday on Sunday, January 25th or 6th, I'm sorry, the Colombians folded. Completely folded. Not only did they fold, but Levitt, who's the White House spokesman, she tweeted out the terms of the deal, and then President Gustavo Petro of Colombia retweeted the White House spokesman's statement on it, which is a pretty incredible climb down. So you got to give the White House credit. We're done with, I mean, to be blunt, pretending that these narco regimes, that these leftist regimes that have no regard for their people, for ours, are partners in any way. They're going to feel hard power, as they ought, and God willing, it's predominantly economic. It's predominantly in the cultural sphere. Cutting off visas, imposing tariffs is a great idea. But
and do you think that this situation will improve how other countries are working, I guess, with the United States?
There's going to be two paths taken. So the Hondurans right now are still barreling down this path, and I think the Mexicans are going to partner with the Hondurans in this, and with a few of the other Northern Triangle regimes to do further things in terms of refusing deportations, confronting the United States, defending sovereignty against the U.S. if we act against cartels. Now, let me say as an aside. Again, this is a phony concern, just like they're concerned for migrants. If they were concerned about sovereignty, they wouldn't cede their sovereignty to narco cartels. In the case of the Mexicans, about 40% of their territory. But they don't really care about that. They just care about the United States, not showing up and imposing some accountability on them. So I don't think this is over. The Colombian example is an example. You're probably going to see, for example, some of the smarter and savvier leftist governments, like the Brazilians, take a longer range approach. to it. So this is all going to take quite a while to work out. It's going to happen more rapidly than 4 years. I mean, I think by the end of it, we're going to have, frankly, a new hemispheric order, which I look forward to. But the other side, and there is another side, has not given up yet, and they're going to have to be brought to that point, which I have no doubt that this administration that's been in power for 7 days has every intent to do.
So, well, let's talk about that. What comes next? So we still have 4 more years of this presidency. Let's start on that national level. What do we expect to come after this?
You know, all I can do is speculate, right? And again, I'll repeat what I said earlier, that if nothing else happened, this would still be the most successful presidency for border and American hemispheric security in over a generation. So thank God for it, really.
It's an impressive 7 days. Or
It's an
impressive first
7
day,
days.
really.
I mean, just imagine what you can achieve if you're actually willing to use the power that the American people hand to you. So it's absolutely phenomenal. I think there's a range of things that probably as we think about the fact that there does have to be a new hemispheric order in this, we're going to have to really address things that we, I think, wrongly thought were put aside almost a century ago. It used to be that the United States had a robust security policy in the hemisphere, and we really don't at this point. What are the strategic points that we need to control? This is what the Greenland and Panama Canal debates are about, by the way.
It connects to all of that in terms of our security?
Absolutely, it does. Without hemispheric security, there is no security, and we have let that go. Think about, again, what the career incentives are in a place like Washington, D.C. You can be, an East Asia specialist. You can be a Middle East specialist. You can be, an East Central Europe specialist. Right. And these are going to advance you, but it hasn't really been since the early 1990s, maybe the late 1980s, that being a Latin America specialist or Western Hemisphere specialist has gotten you anywhere from a career standpoint.
Do you think there was a presumption that we had the security and so it was always going to exist? Or is that how it got let go?
100%. It was a lot of complacency. It was a lot of complacency combined with sort of the same end of history ideology that really infected Washington, D.C., and this hubristic idea that, of course, hemispheric powers, they're going to want to liberalize, they're going to want to remake themselves in the American model, they're going to want to enjoy the benefits of trade, and therefore why would they not want to be under our security umbrella? Why would they not want to do these things?
We have this interesting thing called human nature that often leads people astray.
And look, I think I've mentioned this on the show in probably previous episodes, but Alexis de Tocqueville, correctly observed, back in the 1830s, so almost 200 years ago, that what he called the Spanish republics simply were not concurrent with, from a civics perspective, and should not govern themselves along the same lines as an Anglo-American founded United States of America. It's just a reality. You and I from South Texas can attest to that. It's an awkward fit at points.
Isn't that also something that's kind of attested to in the Texas Declaration of Independence, just that there's a difference of peoples that therefore cannot be governed the same way?
Yeah, exactly. The Texas Declaration of Independence, which does make that point. You're good pull, Ariana. I'm glad you mentioned this.
I'm glad that you're, after you made me make a video about it 3 years in a row.
Yeah. Well, there's a fourth one coming.
A little bit of it.
So, yeah.
I need to gear up for that.
Yeah, you do. No, but you're totally right about that. The Texas Declaration of Independence does actually talk about the disappointment of the Declaration signers in kind of the mass of the Mexican, the fellow Mexican citizens at that point, in their failure to establish ordered liberty. Let's say they didn't use the phrase ordered liberty, but that's what they mean. And what's interesting is that, of course, among the signatories of that declaration are many Tejanos, Mexican Americans who recognize this, and so we're seeing that also come to the fore to an extent. And kind of get back to your question, what's next? I think we need to figure out some kind of ordered policy, and I don't have all the answers. Actually, I might have all the answers, but everybody in policy thinks this. No, but we need to figure out things and address the issues that were addressed by things like the Roosevelt Corollary, which is now 120-ish years old, which says effectively that we can't tolerate ungoverned spaces or poorly governed spaces within the hemisphere, which happens to be totally true. We cannot tolerate a narco state embedded in Mexico. We can't tolerate a narco regime in Nicaragua. We can't tolerate an exporter of revolutionary violence in Havana. Simply for our own well-being, to say nothing of the well-being of the other peoples of the hemisphere. And all that has to be worked out in some kind of orderly fashion, because without securing the hemisphere, we are unable, fundamentally as a nation, to meet our obligations anywhere else in the world. And Americans rightly want to know, why the United States Navy is fighting to open the Red Sea, but not fighting to keep the Caribbean safe and secure, because they can see that from their homes, right? So That's what I think is coming next, and it's going to be a great work, classically defined to do.
Right. So that's at a national level, but I think that also puts Texas, having just started our session as well, in a unique position now to be able to cooperate more easily with the United States, to be frankly. So what are the next steps that Texas can even take to be part of like securing our border or improving our dynamic with Mexico?
Absolutely. No, that's a great question. Look, this is the foundation has a publicly available list that's called the Liberty Action Agenda. You can look at it online, that shows our goals for this 89th Texas legislative session that just began days and days ago. We're going to pursue those with legislative partners, obviously, to make sure that they're passed. Texas has a variety of opportunities: military department reform, formation of a border force, which for me is the capstone of all else, and then there's a variety of other things that Texas can do in order to make sure that our border is secured. This is such a golden opportunity for Texas to culminate and extend the policy leadership that it has shown, primarily to the credit of Governor Abbott, also, credit Lieutenant Governor Patrick as well on this. But because we now have a friendly federal government, a president of the United States who is willing to endorse, support, and extend the actions of Texas to secure the border, and I think the folks in Texas governance understand this very well, have every confidence that they do. This is the opportunity to dial in those wins and really make sure that the role that Texas had in defending its own border from statehood in 1845 all the way through really the 1920s is revived and made permanent, so that the next time we have a Washington, D.C., as is inevitable, God willing, it's not in our lifetimes, but who knows, the next time we have a Washington, D.C. who won't defend the border, the state of Texas can, as it ought.
And I'm looking forward to seeing all the changes that are going to be coming both in Texas and the United States. And just to give a little bit of a teaser for next time. So between now and the next time that we meet on this podcast, there might be a lot of developments that we can get to. But just a little bit of a teaser. Later today, I'm heading down to the Rio Grande Valley.
Yes.
And I'm going to be speaking to some citrus farmers, filming a video with them about how basically, we have a water crisis in Texas right now. Some of the farms have been having to shut down. Citrus is one of the biggest industries there. The sugar, one of those biggest sugar mills had to already shut down.
Yeah.
And a lot of this comes back to a treaty from 1944 with Mexico. So just a little bit of a teaser for next time on what we might get into. Of course, all of this is going to be developing in the United States, so we'll see where that goes. Thank you so much again for this today, Josh.
Amazing. Thank you, Ariana, and Godspeed on the border, as always. That ag community down there needs help, and the reason that they need help is because Mexico, to your point, has failed to deliver its quota of water into the Rio Grande Basin, and that, too, is accountability that we need to bring to bear. So, thanks for your time.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. Thank you, everyone else. This has been The Hard Country, and we'll see you next time.